Old bread can outfish bait that costs $20 a bag. I learned that beside a black river with current pushing hard and bite alarms sitting silent. Fresh bait had failed completely, while a discarded kitchen crust finally brought the first real signal. That was the part I missed for years. Preparation matters more than the bread itself. Ordinary bread turns to paste, slides away, and leaves your hook fishing empty water. Prepared correctly, this version stays compact through a long cast and holds together in moving water. It has produced carp, bream, and selected river catfish for me when expensive options were ignored. The exact mixture is simple, but the small preparation step changes everything. You need stale bread, one ordinary binder, and a little liquid from the kitchen. That combination costs almost nothing, yet it produces bait tough enough for current and patient fishing. I will show you how to make it firm, attractive, and easy to place around the hook. There is no promise that every cast brings a fish because location still decides most outcomes. What this bait does is keep your presentation working instead of disappearing during the cast. That distinction matters when you are fishing long rods, deep water, and alarms through the night. Smell may bring a fish closer, but texture determines whether your bait survives long enough. That lesson came slowly, after far too many expensive sessions and completely empty hooks. I have spent 20 years studying technical river fishing, mostly for large carp and flathead catfish. 2 state record flatheads taught me that presentation beats branding when conditions become difficult. I also brought European-style bank systems onto American rivers, using rod pods and alarms with strict discipline. From that base camp, every rod has a purpose, and every bait gets checked instead of trusted blindly. Trophy fish made me patient because rushing a promising swim usually ruins the information it offers. They also taught me that premium packaging does not automatically create a better meal underwater. For years, I threw away stale bread without wondering whether it belonged in my tackle bucket. Apparently, I needed 2 records and several stubborn blank nights to notice the obvious. One night, the river looked perfect, but the fish had other plans. The weather was stable, the current carried plenty of food, and every alarm remained quiet. I rotated through costly boilies, prepared dough, and commercial catfish bait without changing the result. The rods sat motionless while I stared at water that seemed impossible to ignore. Then I found an old piece of bread near the cooking gear and used it out of desperation. That was not clever planning. It was simply the moment my better ideas had run out. The first indication came slowly, with one alarm giving a short, uncertain chirp. Before I explain what happened next, understand that the bread was not used straight from the bag. Secret number 1 is choosing bread with enough structure to survive handling. Dense, slightly dried bread works far better than fresh slices filled with air. White sandwich bread, hamburger buns, dinner rolls, and older bakery pieces are all useful starting points. Avoid anything moldy, contaminated, or carrying sharp chemical smells from storage or cleaning products. Stale bread absorbs added moisture gradually instead of collapsing the instant it reaches the river. Fresh bread feels softer in your hand, but that softness becomes weakness during casting. The compact version can feed carp, bream, and smaller opportunistic fish without leaving the hook exposed too soon. Once you choose the right bread, one simple addition turns those crumbs into dependable bait. I learned that mistake during a hard current session when fresh bread looked perfectly usable. It felt soft, shaped easily, and failed almost immediately after every cast. Sometimes the hook returned with a thin, wet film, while the bait itself had vanished. That can fool you into thinking fish are refusing the offering when they never saw it. Current pulls at fresh bread from every direction, peeling it away in soggy layers. Now I inspect the hook after every test cast until I know exactly how long the bait lasts. Have you ever blamed silent fish only to discover you were presenting an empty hook? The fix begins by strengthening the bread before adding more smell or changing the rig. Secret number 2 is adding a binder, but using less than most people expect. Mix crushed stale bread with a small amount of flour or fine cornmeal for extra resistance. The binder helps form a firm skin while keeping the center workable around the hook. Add water slowly because one careless pour can turn a useful mixture into loose paste. You want something cool, firm, and slightly tacky between your fingers. It should compress around the hook without feeling rubbery or cracking apart when shaped. The strange rule is that less water usually produces better durability in moving water. Then comes the attraction, and you probably already have the most useful scent in your kitchen. The strongest addition is often not a bottled flavor, but a small amount of leftover food liquid. Tuna water, canned corn liquid, or mild cooking juices can give the crumbs a familiar food signal. Use only a little, because excess liquid weakens the structure you just worked to build. Carp often investigate ordinary food smells, while exaggerated artificial scents can seem unnatural in clear water. River fish do not always need a powerful odor spreading downstream like a chemical announcement. They need a believable food item sitting where they already expect nourishment to collect. I once added so much flavoring that my batch became wet, loose, and useless before casting. The next step is combining those parts in the right order rather than guessing with handfuls. At the river, the finished bait formed a tight ball and survived a hard cast into current. The hook point remained clear and the mixture stayed attached instead of drifting away instantly. After a long, quiet stretch, the nearest alarm suddenly woke with a sharp, rising tone. I did not pretend bread alone created that bite, because fishing is never that simple. Texture kept the bait working, placement put it near feeding water, and patience gave the fish time. The same mixture can fail if you bury the hook point or place it in empty current. Tell me whether you have tested bread for carp or catfish and what held it together best. Next, I will give you the exact proportions, resting time, and rigging details that make this bait reliable. Secret number 3 starts with 2 cups of finely crushed stale bread in a clean bowl. Add 1 small spoonful of flour or fine cornmeal, just enough to strengthen the mixture. Then introduce tuna water, corn liquid, cooking juice, or plain water 1 teaspoon at a time. Stir after every addition, because the crumbs need moisture gradually rather than one sudden flood. When needed, the bait should hold together firmly whenever you squeeze it in your palm. I compare the finished texture to modeling dough that feels slightly tacky, never wet or sloppy. Before mixing the whole batch, I test a small piece around the hook shank for strength, but do not cast immediately because the bait is not truly ready when it first holds together. Give the mixture 15 to 20 minutes beneath a cover, allowing moisture to travel through every crumb. A bowl lid, plastic wrap, or even a damp cloth prevents the surface from drying too quickly. Freshly mixed bait may appear firm while breaking apart as soon as pressure reaches its center. After resting, the crumbs compress more cleanly and behave like one connected piece around the hook. I usually prepare several small portions beside the river, rather than rushing each cast individually. While the bowl sits, I watch the rod pod, study the current, and note floating debris. That quiet pause has saved more bait than any expensive additive I have carried in 20 years. The surprising part is that durability comes partly from time, not another ingredient poured into the bowl. Secret number 4 is matching that rested texture to water temperature and current speed. In warmer water, active fish and stronger feeding often justify a firmer outer layer. During cold spring conditions, cautious carp may respond better when the bait breaks down slightly sooner. Early autumn can fall anywhere between those extremes, depending on sunlight, flow, and natural food activity. A fast current also demands more resistance, regardless of what the calendar says. I test one piece close to shore first, watching how quickly the flow changes its shape. Ask yourself whether the bait is too soft for the river or too hard for suspicious fish. Once the texture matches the conditions, the next detail is keeping the hook ready for contact. Secret number 5 is mounting the bait so the fish finds the hook point immediately. Press the mixture around the hook shank, but leave the point visibly clear and sharp. If you bury that point completely, the bait may look tidy while reducing dependable hookups. For carp, a hair rig can present the compact bait beside the hook rather than hiding it. For mixed species, a simple firm ball on an appropriately sized hook is often enough. Use less bait than instinct suggests, because a giant lump can make cautious fish hesitate. I squeeze the finished piece firmly for casting, then lightly test the exposed point with my thumb. The hook is now prepared, but placement will matter more than adding one extra drop of flavor. Here is the twist. Bait location usually beats bait complexity when river fish are actively feeding. So where would you place it? Beside the roaring seam or directly inside its strongest push? I prefer the slower cushion immediately beside that seam, where fish can feed without wasting energy. Depths from roughly 3 to 8 feet can be productive, depending on the river and season. One rod may cover structure, while another searches clean bottom a short distance away. A trophy fish once took my bread from quiet water, well away from the obvious deep hole. That fish reminded me that expensive bait in empty water remains invisible, no matter how attractive it smells. Now I spread the rods deliberately, treating the swim like a problem that must reveal its answer. Secret number 6 is using 2 or 3 rods to compare water, distance, and depth. I place one near the margin, another beside the current seam, and a third farther out. That spread shows whether fish are feeding shallow, tracking the flow, or holding beyond the first break. My European-style pod and bite alarms make small changes visible without turning every twitch into panic. Keep within local rod limits and public water regulations, because disciplined fishing includes knowing the rules. I record the time, depth, location, and bait condition whenever a rod produces an indication. Changing every rod after one missed bite destroys the evidence you needed to understand the swim. Treat the spread like a chessboard, then separate what the bait does from what the water does. If the bait flies off during casting, first reduce the liquid and extend the resting period. You can also compress the outside more firmly, especially where the hook shank enters the ball. If the mixture becomes too hard, soften only one small portion instead of damaging the entire batch. A few drops worked into that portion can restore movement without making every bait weak. When small fish strip it, form a larger compact piece or build a tougher outer layer. Check the hook after each cast because that reveals whether current, casting, or bait fish caused failure. I once blamed a river full of uninterested fish before discovering 3 empty hooks in succession. If you have your own bread bait variation or failure fix, I would genuinely like to hear it below. On one dark evening, a rested bread ball sat beside a slower seam while the river carried on noisily. The alarm gave a single tap, paused, then sounded again as the rod tip began loading gradually. I waited instead of striking at the first vibration, letting the fish move away and commit. When the blank curved steadily, I lifted the rod and applied controlled pressure against the current. The fish stayed deep, using the flow, but the compact bait had remained available long enough for that opportunity. Minutes later, a broad carp surfaced beside the bank, silver scales shining briefly beneath my headlamp. That catch was not guaranteed magic. Location, timing, hook presentation, and patience had all shared the work. The overlooked bread simply stayed there, ready, while more expensive bait sat untouched on another rod. That is the real lesson. Stale bread becomes valuable when moisture, texture, scent, and placement are controlled. Choose dense leftovers, add a little binder, introduce liquid carefully, and let the mixture rest before fishing. Adjust firmness for temperature and current, expose the hook point, and search slower water beside the main seam. A discarded kitchen crust, reshaped beside a dark American river, can become a serious trophy opportunity. Sometimes the best bait is already waiting in your kitchen, overlooked because nobody bothered to understand it. If this helped, leave a like, subscribe, and share your bread bait results in the comments when you try it. In the next video, I will show how I locate trophy catfish in heavy current by reading overlooked holding water. Until then, remember that patience turns tiny advantages into big fish, while quiet alarms keep watch beside the river.